I was asked to speak about what the Sharon government at the time was planning to expel the Jews of Gaza and transfer Gaza to the Palestinians. And at the time, I, like many other people, warned that the moment that Israel left, Gaza, it would become a base of international terrorism. And you know, I said within weeks. It actually happened in 5 minutes. When 5 minutes after the last Israeli tank left, or as the Israeli tank was leaving, all of the synagogues of Gaza went up in flames. In fact, we saw the flames from the synagogues as the cameras were rolling and showing the last tank coming out. There were flames in the background because there were the the Jewish synagogues that were going up in smoke. And so it actually happened simultaneously, and it's only gotten worse since then. And that really is the segue to what I was asked to speak about this evening, which is what the flames that are now burning throughout the Arab world, the so-called Arab revolt, or for whatever reason, the optimists are referring to it as a spring, although not such a spring. What is happening in the Arab world and how it's going to impact Israel and the power balance between Israel and Iran. Can we just assume that I'm going to be sitting really close because I can't seem to move backwards? Thanks. Anyway, so what we see really in the Arab world is extraordinary. We are living in an extraordinary period. For years and years and years, people have warned, like myself, that because the Arab world is one big tyranny, with each separate state run by its own private dictator who runs his country as a fiefdom, that it was just a matter of time before things exploded, because that's the nature of tyrannies, that when you're repressing a large number of people or your entire population, then it's only a matter of time before the dissatisfaction and frustration with your rule is going to bubble across the surface and cause an earthquake. And that is exactly what we're seeing now. What began seemingly in Tunisia last December, and then moved to Egypt and to the Persian Gulf, to Bahrain, and to Yemen, and to Oman, and to Saudi Arabia, and to Jordan, and to Syria, and to Iran, and so on, and Morocco, and Algeria, and so on and so forth, and Libya, of course, did not start in December when Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian unemployed academic, set himself on fire. It began much earlier, and it's hard to date exactly when, but it's possible to say that when the Americans took down Saddam Hussein, that it set in motion a chain of events that led people to believe that they didn't have to live under tyranny. Now, all of this sounds, and you know, on a sort of philosophical level, it's a wonderful thing when tyrants are felled by their people who are dissatisfied with their lot in life. The problem for Israel is that one of the things that tyrannies do in order to maintain their legitimacy in the eyes of their repressed people is they create external enemies around which, against which they can mobilize their entire people to try to justify their continued reign. And so in the case of the Arab world, of course, the outside enemy was twofold. One was the United States, the great state, and the other one was, of course, the Jewish people in Israel. And so, unfortunately, today, when we look at the populist fervor in the Arab world, we understand that the single major, the glue that holds together Arab societies that are diverse from an ethnic perspective, a religious perspective, tribal perspectives, and so on and so forth, is hatred of Israel, hatred of Jews. That this is the diet that they've been fed for generations upon generations, and Islam itself is not at all sympathetic towards Jews. So that when you talk about a populist wave rushing through the Arab world, you recognize that actually the forces that are being empowered are not forces of liberal democracy, but rather they're forces of, from our perspective, of massive, massive hatred of Jews. And we see it today with Egypt, where so many of the commentators in the United States were saying how wonderful it was that they were overthrowing this tyrant Mubarak and how great it was and all the rest of it. Well, the only strong, tangible social forces in Egypt are the Muslim Brotherhood, which spawned Hamas and Al-Qaeda and a host of other jihadist terror organizations throughout the Muslim world. And so we see now that in order to gain popularity amongst the newly empowered Egyptian people, you have everybody from Mohammed El-Baradei, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, to Amr Musa, and so on and so forth, the outgoing head of the Arab League, saying that they either want to abrogate their peace treaty with Israel, or today El-Baradei said that if Israel attacks Hamas in Gaza, that Egypt will declare war on the Zionists. So this is what we're getting from Egypt, and this was eminently predictable, unfortunately, given the bile, the anti-Semitic bile that they've been ingesting for so long. So, even now when we look and say, well, what's going to happen in Saudi, what's going to happen in Jordan, it's possible what's going to happen in Syria. It's possible that waves will be repressed and that the tyrants will be able to go back to leading. But what we've seen is that the basic turbulence of tyrannical society is such that the demonstrations and the rioting that we've been seeing for the past few months is going to come back. That is, we can never expect, if the Yemenite president is able to take charge again, he's not going to be there for very long. And the Saudis the same way. Everybody is standing on the edge, and all of them are going to be toppled, certainly within our lifetimes. And so that's important. And so when we say, is this going to pan out well, is it going to be panning out badly? So again, we see in Egypt that the country that was the foundation stone of the American alliance system in the Arab world is now essentially switching sides. And then, the Egyptians have the most powerful army in the Arab world. It's an American army. It was trained by the Americans. It's based completely on American military platforms. They have Abrams tanks. They have F-16 jet fighters. They have a much more powerful navy than Israel does. And this is not the Israeli army that Israel defeated in 1973. This is a completely different kettle of fish. They also have, of course, missiles and unconventional weapons, chemical weapons. They used chemical weapons in the 1960s in their war against Yemen. So, this is a very, very big deal, and will likely be a very, very bad thing indeed. There are a couple of upsides, but before I get to them, we should actually go through the taxonomy of the countries. Egypt, what happened in Egypt is a disaster, quite simply, because even though it will take a new regime some time to get settled in and to take over all the power sections, what we have already now is a massive loss in the column. And when I say loss, I say this as somebody who's an outspoken critic of Mubarak for years, because Mubarak, as the president of Egypt, was the leader of the political war against Israel in every diplomatic forum, in every UN body, in every campus and university. It was always the Egyptians were at the forefront of the war against Israel, the war to delegitimize Israel. So how can I be mourning his removal from the scene when he himself was not a friend of Israel? And the reason is because he had joint interests with Israel, because the greatest threat to his regime, as we see now, remained was the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and Iran. That he worked viciously to repress the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and to fight Al-Qaeda and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and to keep Iran down. And so these were very important interests, or the primary interest that Mubarak had in maintaining power in Egypt, and they were all interests that aligned with Israel's interests and, of course, with Western interests.